The United Kingdom is a mysterious place. There is very little known about the United Kingdom until the arrival of the Romans. The Romans and the Greeks described the ancient British as advanced in mathematics with functioning education and justice systems, but primitive in religion. The ancient Britons were Druids, a forgotten religion. Many were killed, and the religion was nearly destroyed or at least forced underground by the Roman Empire. Since ancient Celts didn't use the written word, all of our accounts about the Druids come from outsiders, particularly the Romans. Druids are engaged in things sacred, conduct the public and the private sacrifices, and interpret all matters of religion, wrote Julius Caesar in the 50s BC, after Rome invaded Gaul. Other Roman writers also fixated on the Druids' love of blood and gore. Pliny the Elder wrote of the Druids' appreciation for both mistletoe and human sacrifice. To murder a man was to do the act of highest devoutness, he wrote. And to eat his flesh was to secure the highest blessings of health. Tacitus even described a battle in Wales in which Druids covered their altars with the blood of captives and consulted their deities through human entrails. Hidden in our history and mythology are stories of sorcery, demons, vampires, witches, warlocks, shapeshifters, occultists, and wizards. Some stories from ancient Britain even claim that Stonehenge was built with magic, by the most famous of all wizards, Merlin. Some stories even talk of Merlin being aided with the construction of Stonehenge by giants. Like many ancient cultures, the Druids are thought to have practiced barbaric human sacrifices performed to please or appease certain so-called gods and deities. Stories and accusations of witchcraft sound very far-fetched to most, yet they have appeared time and again in our history. The Salem witch trials of 1692 to 1693 might be among the most famous in history, but they were by no means alone, nor was the paranoia that surrounded the grim witch hunts of the 17th and 18th centuries unique to New England or even the United States. Witch trials were being carried out all across Europe right upon until around 1800. And even after that, isolated cases and accusations continued. There are thought to have been between 1,500 and 2,000 executions for witchcraft in the British Isles between 2 years 1450 to 1750 out of 5,000 trials, as well as between 25,000 and 30,000 executions for witchcraft in the Holy Roman Empire, which consisted of Germany, Netherlands, Switzerland, Lorraine, Austria, Czech lands, Bohemia, Moravia and Silesia. Today the witch trials are usually credited to self-righteous, hysterical, dangerous mobs that were more dangerous than any witch could possibly be. Yet accusations of witchcraft have reached almost every corner of the world and at different time periods. Even now in 2020 they refuse to go away. As of 2006, between 25,000 and 50,000 children in Kinshasa, Democratic Republic of the Congo, had been accused of witchcraft and thrown out of their homes. These children have been subjected to often violent abuse during exorcisms, sometimes supervised by self-styled religious pastors. Other pastors and Christian activists strongly oppose such accusations and try to rescue children from their unscrupulous colleagues. The usual term for these children is enfant sorciers, child witches, or enfant dit sorciers, children accused of witchcraft. In 2002, USAID funded the production of 2 short films on the subject, made in Kinshasa by journalists Angela Nikora and Mike Ormsby. In April 2008, in Kinshasa, the police arrested 14 suspected victims of penis snatching and sorcerers accused of using black magic or witchcraft to steal, make disappear, or shrink men's penises to extort cash for cure. Amid a wave of panic in Ghana, women are often accused of witchcraft and attacked by neighbors. Because of this, there exist 6 witch camps in the country where women suspected of being witches can flee for safety. The witch camps, which exist solely in Ghana, are thought to house a total of around 1,000 women. Some of the camps are thought to have been set up over 100 years ago. The Ghanaian government has announced that it intends to close the camps. History.com explains. Early witches were people who practiced witchcraft, using magic spells and calling upon spirits for help or to bring about change. Most witches were thought to be pagans doing the devil's work. Many, however, were simply natural healers or so-called wise women whose choice of profession was misunderstood. Are the modern-day interpretations of the witch trials and witches accurate? Were the witch trials based on hysteria? Or were the fears of many people actually legitimate fears? To find out the answer, we first need to understand what a witch and witchcraft is. According to the online encyclopedia, Britannica.com, witchcraft, traditionally, the exercise or invocation of alleged supernatural powers to control people or events, practices typically involving sorcery or magic. Although defined differently in disparate historical and cultural contexts, witchcraft has often been seen, especially in the West, as the work of crones who meet secretly at night, indulge in cannibalism and orgiastic rites with the devil, or Satan, and perform black magic. Based on that description, does witchcraft exist? Like History.com and all mainstream modern-day media, Britannica.com dismisses the reality of witchcraft. It continues, witchcraft thus defined exists more in the imagination of contemporaries than in any objective reality. Yet this stereotype has a long history and has constituted for many cultures a viable explanation of evil in the world. The intensity of these beliefs is best represented by the European witch hunts of the 14th to 18th century. But witchcraft and its associated ideas are never far from the surface of popular consciousness, and sustained by folk tales find explicit focus from time to time in popular television and films. And in fiction it's unclear exactly when witches came on the historical scene, but some of the earliest records of a witch are in the Bible. In the book of 1 Samuel, it tells the story of when King Saul sought the witch of Endor to summon the dead prophet Samuel's spirit to help him defeat the Philistine army. The witch roused Samuel, who then prophesied the death of Saul and his sons. The next day, according to the Bible, Saul's sons died in battle, and Saul committed suicide. Other Old Testament verses condemn witches, such as the oft-cited Exodus 22:18, which says, "Thou shalt not suffer a witch to live." Additional biblical passages caution against divination, chanting, or using witches to contact the dead. There are many misconceptions when it comes to the witch trials. The first one being that only women were tried and executed for witchcraft. Some historians believe that up to a quarter of all people executed for witchcraft were men. Male witches were known as warlocks. Witches and warlocks were believed to have the ability to shape-shift into animals and possess people. Another misconception is that it was mainly the poor accused and tried for witchcraft. Statistically, there are more poor people than rich people, so you would expect more poor people to be tried as witches, but many of the people accused, tried and executed for witchcraft were in fact rich and sometimes high on the social ladder. In 1542, Henry VIII passed an act against witchcraft. It was already considered a problem in the 15th century, but King Henry VIII opened the doors for trials on a larger scale. Some believed that he did it due to his belief that Anne Boleyn, whom he had beheaded in 1536, was a witch who manipulated him by her spells. Thomas Doughty, born 1545, was an English nobleman, soldier, scholar, and personal secretary of Christopher Hatton. His association with Francis Drake, on a 1577 voyage to rob Spanish treasure fleets, ended in a shipboard trial for treason and witchcraft, and Doughty's execution. The incident set an important precedent, according to a history of the English Navy, titled To Rule the Waves. How the British Navy Shaped the Modern World by Arthur L. Herman. Doughty's execution established the idea that a ship's captain was its absolute ruler, regardless of the rank or social class of its passengers. Arguably Britain's most famous witch, Agnes Waterhouse, was also known as Mother Waterhouse. On the July 29, 1566, she became the first woman to be executed for witchcraft in England. She confessed to having been a witch and that her familiar was a cat by the name of Satan. Agnes Waterhouse dealt with the devil, cursed people, and murdered her enemies using black magic. She owned a cat named Satan, which she sent to kill her enemies' livestock, or even the enemies themselves. The examination and confession of certain witches at Chelmsford in the county of Essex before the Queen's Majesties was written in 1566. So the English is old and sometimes could be hard to understand, but it is interesting and worth looking at. It describes encounters with the witch, Agnes Waterhouse. When this mother had given her the cat Sathan, then this Elizabeth desired first of the said cat, calling it Sathan, that she might be rich and to have goods, and he promised her she should. Asking her what she would he, and she said sheep, or this cat spoke to her as she confessed in a strange hollow voice, but such as she understood by use, and this cat forthwith brought sheep into her pasture to the number of 16 black and white, which continued with her for a time. But in the end did all wear away, she knew not how. When she had gotten these sheep, she desired to have on Andrew Biles to her husband, which was a man of some wealth, and the cat did promise she should. But that he said she must first consent that Andrew should abuse her, and she so did. And after when this Andrew had thus abused her, he would not marry her, wherefore she willed Sathan to waste his goods, which he forthwith did, and yet not being contented with this, she wiled him to touch his body, which he forthwith did, whereof he died. That every time that he did anything for her, she said that he required a drop of blood, which she gave him by pricking herself, sometime in one place and then in another. And where she pricked herself there remained a red spot, which was still to be seen. When this Andrew was dead, she, doubting herself with child, led Sathan to destroy it, and he bade her take a certain herb and drink it, which she did, and destroyed the child forthwith. When she desired another husband, he promised her another, naming this Francis, whom she now hath, but said he is not so rich as the other. Willing her to consent unto that Francis in fornication, which she did, and thereof concealed a daughter that was born within a quarter of a year after they were married. After they were married they lived not so quietly as she desired, being stirred, as she said, to much quietnesses and mouth to swearing and cursing. Wherefore she willed Sathan her cat to kill the child, being about the age of half a year old, and he did so, and when she yet found not the quietness that she desired, she willed it to lay a lanes in the leg of thus Francis her husband, and it did in this manner. It came in a morning to this Francis' shoe, lying in it like a toad, and when he perceived it putting on his shoe, and had touched it with his foot, he being suddenly amazed asked of her what it was. And she bade him kill it, and he was forthwith taken with a lameness whereof he cannot healed. After all this, when she had kept this cat, some say, though untruly, being weary of it, she came to one Mother Waterhouse her neighbor, a poor woman, and desired her to give her a cake, and she would give her a thing that she should be the better for so long as she lived, and this Mother Waterhouse gave her a cake. Whereupon she brought her this cat in her apron and taught her as she was instructed before by her grandmother Eve, telling her that she must call him Sathan, and gave him of her blood and bread and milk as before, and at this examination would confess no more. On July 29, 1566, 2 days after the trial finished, Agnes Waterhouse was executed. At this time she repented and asked for forgiveness from God. She also confessed to her attempt to send the cat to hurt and damage the goods of her neighbor, the tailor named Wardall. However, this was regarded as having been unsuccessful because the Wardall was so strong in faith. When questioned about her church habits, Agnes Waterhouse said that she prayed often, but always in Latin because the cat forbid her from praying in English. To understand how people thought about witches at the time, we have to look at their own writings. Matthew Hopkins, born 1620, was an English witch hunter whose career flourished during the English Civil War. He claimed to hold the office of Witchfinder General, although that title was never bestowed by Parliament. His activities mainly took place in East Anglia. Hopkins' witch-finding career began in March 1644 and lasted until his retirement in 1647. He and his associates were responsible for more people being hanged for witchcraft in their 3-year reign than in the previous 100 years. They are thought to be solely responsible for the increase in witch trials during those years. He is believed to have been responsible for the executions of 300 alleged witches between the years 1644 and 1646. In 1647 he published a book called The Discovery of Witches. In answer to several queries lately delivered to the judges of assize for the County of Norfolk, and now published by Matthew Hopkins, Witchfinder, for the benefit of the whole kingdom. This book answers 13 questions described as certain queries answered, which have been and are likely to be objected against Matthew Hopkins, in his way of finding out witches. Query 1. That he must needs be the greatest witch, sorcerer, and wizard himself, else he could not do it. Answer. If Satan's kingdom be divided against itself, how shall it stand? Query 2. If he never went so far as is before mentioned, yet for certain he met with the devil, and cheated him of his book, wherein were written all the witches' names in England, and if he looks on any witch, he can tell by her countenance what she is, so by this, his help is from the devil. Answer. If he had been too hard for the devil and got his book, it had been to his great commendation, and no disgrace at all, and for judgment in physiognomy, he hath no more than any man else whatsoever. Query 3. From whence then proceeded this his skill? Was it from his profound learning, or from much reading of learned authors concerning that subject? Answer. From neither of both, but from experience, which though it be meanly esteemed of, yet the surest and safest way to judge by. Query 4. I pray, where was this experience gained? And why gained by him and not by others? The discoverer never traveled far for it, but in March 1644 he had some 7 or 8 of that horrible sect of witches living in the town where he lived, a town in Essex called Manningtree, with divers other adjacent witches of other towns, who every 6 weeks in the night, being always on the Friday night, had their meeting close by his house and had their several solemn sacrifices there offered to the devil. One of which this discoverer heard speaking to her imps one night, and bid them go to another witch, who was thereupon apprehended, and searched by women who had for many years known the devil's marks, and found to have 3 teats about her, which honest women have not. So upon command from the justice they were to keep her from sleep 2 or 3 nights, expecting in that time to see her familiars, which the 4th night she called in by their several names, and told them what shapes, a quarter of an hour before they came in, there being 10 of us in the room. The first she called was one Holt, who came in like a white kitling; 2 Jarmara, who came in like a fat spaniel without any legs at all. She said she kept him fat, for she clapped her hand on her belly and said he sucked good blood from her body. 3 Vinegar Tom, who was like a long-legged greyhound, with an head like an ox, with a long tail and broad eyes, who when this discoverer spoke to and bade him go to the place provided for him and his angels, immediately transformed himself into the shape of a child of 4 years old without a head, and gave half a dozen turns about the house, and vanished at the door. 4 Sack and Sugar, like a black rabbit. 5 News, like a polecat. All these vanished away in a little time. Immediately after this witch confessed several other witches, from whom she had her imps, and named to divers women where their marks were, the number of their marks, and imps' names, as Elemanzer, Payuakat, Pekin the Crown, Grizzle, Greedigut, etc., which no mortal could invent. And upon their searches the same marks were found, the same number, and in the same place, and the like confessions from them of the same imps. Though they knew not that we were told before, and so peached one another thereabouts that joined together in the like damnable practice that in our 100 in Essex, 29, were condemned at once, for sending the devil like a bear to kill him in his garden. So by seeing diverse of the men's paps, and trying ways with hundreds of them, he gained this experience, and for aught he knows any man else may find them as well as he and his company, if they had the same skill and experience. Query 5. Many poor people are condemned for having a pap, or teat about them, whereas many people, especially antient people, are, and have been a long time troubled with natural rits on several parts of their bodies and other natural excrescencies, as hemorrhoids, piles, childbearing. And these shall be judged only by one man alone and a woman, and so accused or acquitted. Answer. The parties so judging can justify their skill to any, and show good reasons why such marks are not merely natural, neither that they can happen by any such natural cause as is before expressed. And for further answer for their private judgments alone, it is most false and untrue, for never was any man tried by search of his body. But commonly a dozen of the ablest men in the parish or elsewhere, were present, and most commonly as many ancient skillful matrons and midwives present when the women are tried. Which marks not only he, and his company attest to be very suspicious, but all beholders, the skillfulest of them, do not approve of them. But likewise assent that such tokens cannot in their judgments proceed from any the above mentioned causes. Query 6. It is a thing impossible for any or woman to judge rightly on such marks, they are so near to natural excrescencies, and they that find them durst not presently give oath they were drawn by evil spirits, till they have used unlawful courses of torture to make them say anything for ease and quiet, as who would not do. But I would know the reasons he speaks of, how, and whereby to discover the one from the other, and so be satisfied in that. Answer. The reasons in brief are 3, which for the present he judgeth to differ from natural marks, which are: 1. He judgeth by the unusualness of the place where he findeth the teats in or on their bodies, being far distant from any usual place, from whence such natural marks proceed. As if a witch plead the marks found are emerods, if I find them on the bottom of the backbone, shall I assent with him, knowing they are not near that vein, and so others by childbearing, when it may be they are in the contrary part. 2. They are most commonly insensible, and feel neither pin, needle, awl, thrust through them. 3. The often variations and mutations of these marks into several forms, confirm the matter. As if a witch here a month or 2 before that the witch-finder, as they call him, is coming, they will, and have put out their imps to others to suckle them. Even to their own young and tender children, these upon search are found to have dry-skinned and fill mace only, and be close to the flesh, keep her 24 hours with a diligent eye, that none of her spirits come in any visible shape to suck her. The women have seen the next day after her teats extended out to their former filling length, full of corruption ready to burst, and leaving her alone then 1/4 of an hour. And let the women go up again, and she will have them drawn by her imps close again, probatum est. Now for answer to their tortures in its due place. Query 7. How can it possibly be that the devil bring a spirit, and wants no nutriment or sustentation, should desire to suck any blood, and indeed as he is a spirit he cannot draw any such excrescences, having neither flesh nor bone, nor can be felt, etc. Answer. He seeks not their blood, as if he could not subsist without that nourishment, but he often repairs to them, and gets it, the more to aggravate the witch's damnation, and to put her in mind of her covenant. And as he is a spirit and prince of the air, he appears to them in any shape whatsoever, which shape is occasioned by him through joining of condensed thickened air together, and many times doth assume shapes of many creatures. But to create anything he cannot do it, it is only proper to God. But in this case of drawing out of these teats, he doth really enter into the body, real, corporeal, substantial creature, and forceth that creature, he working in it, to his desired ends, and useth the organs of that body to speak withal to make his compact up with the witches, be the creature cat, rat, mouse, etc. Query 8. When these paps are fully discovered, yet that will not serve sufficiently to convict them, but they must be tortured and kept from sleep 2 or 3 nights, to distract them, and make them say anything, which is a way to tame a wild colt, or hawk, etc. Answer. In the infancy of this discovery it was not only thought fitting, but enjoined in Essex and Suffolk by the magistrates, with this intention only, because they being kept awake would be more the active to call their imps in open view the sooner to their help, which oftentimes have so happened. And never or seldom did any witch ever compelain in the time of their keeping for want of rest, but after they had beat their heads together in the goal. And after this use was not allowed of by the judges and other magistrates, it was never since used, which is 1.5 years since. Neither were any kept from sleep by any order or direction since, but peradventure their own stubborn wills did not let them sleep, though tendered and offered to them. Query 9. Beside that unreasonable watching, they were extraordinarily walked, till their feet were blistered, and so forced through that cruelty to confess, etc. Answer. It was in the same beginning of this discovery, and the meaning of walking of them at the highest extent of cruelty, was only they to walk about themselves the night they were watched, only to keep them waking, and the reason was this: when they did lie or sit in a chair, if they did offer to couch down, then the watchers were only to desire them to sit up and walk about. For indeed when they be suffered so to couch, immediately comes their familiars into the room and scareth the watchers, and hearteneth on the witch. Though contrary to the true meaning of the same instructions, diverse have been by rustical people, they hearing them confess to be witches, misused, spoiled, and abused. Diverse whereof have suffered for the same, but could never be proved against this discoverer to have a hand in it, or consent to it, and hath likewise been unused by him and others, ever since the time they were kept from sleep. Query 10. But there hath been an abominable, inhumane, and unmerciful trial of these poor creatures, by tying them, and heaving them into the water. A trial not allowable by law or conscience, and I would fain know the reasons for that. Answer: it is not denied, but many were so served as had paps, and floated, others that had none were tried with them and sunk, but mark the reasons. For first, the devil's policy is great, in persuading many to come of their own accord to be tried, persuading them their marks are so close they shall not be found out. So as divers have come 10 or 12 miles to be searched of their own accord, and hanged for their labor, as one Meggs a baker did, who lived within 7 miles of Norwich, and was hanged at Norwich Assizes for witchcraft. Then when they find that the devil tells them false, they reflect on him, and he, as 40 have confessed, adviseth them to be sworn, and telephones them they shall sink and be cleared that way. Then when they be tried that way and float, they see the devil deceives them again, and have so laid open his treacheries. 2. It was never brought in against any of them at their trials as any evidence. 3. King James in his Demonology saith, it is a certain rule, for, saith he, witches deny their baptisma when they covenant with the devil, water being the sole element thereof. And therefore, saith he, when they be heaved into the water refused to receive them into her bosom, they being such miscreants to deny their baptisma, and suffers them to float. As the froth on the sea, which the water will not receive, but casts it up and down till it comes to the earthy element the shore, and there leaves it to consume. 4. Observe these generation of witches, if they be at any time abused by being called whore, thief, etc., by anywhere they live, they are the readiest to cry and wring their hands, and shed tears in abundance, and run with full and right sorrowful acclamations to some justice of the peace, and with many tears make their complaints, but now behold their stupidity. Nature or the elements' reflection from them, when they are accused for this horrible and damnable sin of witchcraft, they never alter or change their countenances nor let one tear fall. This, by the way, swimming, by able divines whom I reverence, is condemned for no way, and therefore of late hath, and forever shall be left. Query 11. But if this torturing witch-catcher can by all or any of these means wring out a word or two of confession from any of these stupefied, ignorant, unintelligible, poor silly creatures, though none hear it but himself, he will add and put her in fear to confess, telling her, else she shall be hanged. But if she do, he will set her at liberty, and so put a word into her mouth, and make such a silly creature confess she knows not what. Answer: he is of a better conscience, and for your better understanding of him, he doth thus uncase himself to all, and declares what confessions, though made by a witch against herself, he allows not of, and doth altogether account of no validity, or worthy of credence to be given to it, and ever did so account it, and ever likewise shall. 1. He utterly denies that confession of a witch to be of any validity, when it is drawn from her by any torture or violence whatsoever. Although after watching, walking, or swimming, divers have suffered, yet peradventure magistrates with much care and diligence did solely and fully examine them after sleep, and consideration sufficient. 2. He utterly denies that confession of a witch, which is drawn from her by flattery, viz. If you will confess you shall go home, you shall not go to the gaol, nor be hanged, etc. 3. He utterly denies that confession of a witch, when she confesseth any improbability, impossibility, as flying in the air, riding on a broom, etc. 4. He utterly denies a confession of a witch, when it is interrogated to her, and words put into her mouth, to be of any force or effect. As to say to a silly, yet which wicked enough, you have four imps have you not? She answers affirmatively, yes, did they not suck you? Yes, saith she, are not their names so, and so? Yes, saith she, did not you send such an imp to kill my child? Yes, saith she, this being all her confession after this manner, it is by him accompted nothing. And he earnestly doth desire that all magistrates and jurors would a little more than ever they did examine witnesses about the interrogated confessions. Query 12. If all those confessions be denied, I wonder what he will make confession, for sure it is, all these ways have been used and took for good confessions, and many have suffered for them. And I know not what, he will then make confession. Answer yes, in brief he will declare what confession of a witch is of validity and force in his judgment, to hang a witch. When a witch is first found with teats, then sequestered from her house, which is only to keep her old associates from her, and so by good counsel brought into a sad condition, by understanding of the horribleness of her sin, and the judgments threatened against her, and knowing the devil's malice and subtle circumventions, is brought to remorse and sorrow for complying with Satan so long, and disobeying God's sacred commands, doth then desire to unfold her mind with much bitterness, and then without any of the before mentioned hard usages or questions put to her, doth of her own accord declare what was the occasion of the devil's appearing to her, whether ignorance, pride, anger, malice, etc. was predominant over her. She doth then declare what speech they had, what likeness he was in, what voice he had, what familiars he sent her, what number of spirits, what names they had, what shape they were in, what employment she set them about to several persons in several places, unknown to the hearers, all which mischiefs being proved to be done. At the same time she confessed to the same parties for the same cause, and all effected, is testimony enough again her for all her denial. Quest 13. How can any possibly believe that the devil and the witch joining together, should have such power, as the witches confess to kill such a man, child, horse, cow, the like? If we believe they can do what they will, then we derogate from God's power, who for certain limits the devil and the witch, and I cannot believe they have any power at all. God suffers the devil many times to do much hurt, and the devil doth play many times the deluder and impostor with these witches, in persuading them that they are the cause of such and such a murder wrought by him with their consents, when and indeed neither he nor they had any hand in it, as thus. We must needs argue, he is of a long standing, above 6,000 years, then he must needs be the best scholar in all knowledges of arts and tongues, and so have the best skill in physical judgment in physiognomy, and knowledge of what disease is reigning or predominant in this or that man's body, and so foretell too, by reason of his long experience. This subtle tempter knowing such a man liable to some sudden disease, as by experience I have found, as pleurisy, imposthume, etc. He resorts to divers witches, if they know the man, and seek to make a difference between the witches and the party, it may be by telling them he hath threatened to have them very shortly searched, and so hanged for witches. Then they all consult with Satan to save themselves, and Satan stands ready prepared, with a "What will you have me do for you, my dear and nearest children? Covenanted and compacted with me in my hellish league, and sealed with your blood, my delicate firebrand darlings." The devil's speech to the witches. "O thou," say they, "that at the first didst promise to save us thy servants from any of our deadly enemies' discovery, and didst promise to avenge and flay all those, we pleased, that did offend us. Murder that wretch suddenly who threatens the downfall of your loyal subjects. He then promiseth to effect it. Next news is heard the party is dead, he comes to the witch, and gets a world of reverence, credence, and respect for his power and activeness, when and indeed the disease kills the party. Not the witch, nor the devil, only the devil knew that such a disease was predominant, and the witch aggravates her damnation by her familiarity and consent to the devil. And so comes likewise in compass of the laws. This is Satan's usual impostring and deluding, but not his constant course of proceeding, for he and the witch do mischief too much. But I would that magistrates and jurats would a little examine witnesses when they hear witches confess such and such a murder, whether the party had not long time before, or at the time when the witch grew suspected, some disease or other predominant, which might cause that issue or effect of death. Query 14. All that the witch-finder doth is to fleece the country of their money, and therefore rides and goes to towns to have employment, and promiseth them fair promises, and it may be doth nothing for it. And posse saith many men that they have so many wizards and so many witches in their town, and so hardens them on to entertain him. Answer, you do him a great deal of wrong in every of these particulars. 4. First, 1. He never went to any town or place, but they wrote, writ, or sent often for him, and were, for aught he knew, glad of him. 2. He is a man that doth disclaim that ever he detected a witch, or said, thou art a witch, only after her try all by search, and their own confessions, he as others may judge. 3. Lastly, judge how he fleeceth the country, and enriches himself, by considering the vast sum he takes of every town. He demands but 20 shilling a town, and doth sometimes ride 20 miles for that, and hath no more for all his charges thither and back again, and it may be stays a week there, and find there 3 or 4 witches, or if it be but one, cheap enough, and this is the great sum he takes to maintain his company with 3 horses. That was The Discovery of Witches, published by Matthew Hopkins in 1647, the same year of his death at the age of 27. According to Britannica.com, it has long been propounded that Hopkins was himself accused of being a witch, subjected to his own test of being bound and thrown into water and hanged after he was found to float. It is believed that he died of pleural tuberculosis, but his premature death would have surely convinced some that dark forces were at play. In 1589, when a young family named the Throckmortons moved into the manor house beside the church in the rural English village of Warboys, 20 miles north of Cambridge. Soon afterwards, one of the family's young daughters, Jane, began suffering seizures and fits, which the local doctors could not to ease or cure. Then one day the Throckmortons' neighbors John and Alice Samuel, and their daughter Agnes happened to pay the family a visit, but as soon as Alice arrived and took a seat by the fire, Jane's condition suddenly worsened, and she began to point wildly at Alice, screaming, "Look where the old witch sits." The mother quickly rebuked Jane and thought nothing more of it. But as more of the children began showing similar symptoms and a respected physician was unable to discover the cause, suspicions returned to the Samuels. The first allegations declaring Alice as a practitioner of witchcraft were made in November 1589. Following this, there were a total of 12 maidservants of the Throckmorton household, in addition to the 5 daughters, who experienced fits and the torment of Alice Samuel's witchcraft. Jane's fits were described as such: sometimes she would sneeze very loud and thick for the space of half an hour together, and evidently as one in a great trance, and sound lay quietly as long, soon after would begin to swell and heave up her belly so as none was able to bend her or keep her down. Sometime thee would shake one leg and no other part of her, as if the palsy had been in it, sometimes the other. Presently she would shake one of her arms and then the other, and soon after her head, as if she had been infected with the running palsy. Jane's mother and grandmother were by the child's side while other neighbors came to see her. When Alice Samuel came in, the child proclaimed, "Grandmother, look where the old witch sitteth," pointing to Samuel. "Did you ever see one more like a witch than she is? Take off her black thrummed shaggy or fringed cap, for I cannot abide to look on her." Jane's mother thought nothing of this at first, thinking her child was sleep-deprived and sick. However, because Jane continued to get worse, her parents sent her urine to Dr. Barrow of Cambridge, who sent medicine to Jane 3 separate times thinking it would heal her. It did not. After the third time, the doctor inquired whether there were any signs of sorcery or witchcraft involved that the parents could see. Jane's urine was then sent to a family acquaintance, Master Butler, for examination, and he sent back the same remedies that Dr. Barrow had sent. Exactly a month later, on the same day almost to the hour, 2 more of Master Throckmorton's daughters fell sick to the same illness that was afflicting Jane. Robert Throckmorton was a close friend of Sir Henry Cromwell, one of the wealthiest commoners in England and the grandfather of Oliver Cromwell. In March 1590, Lady Cromwell came to Warboys to visit. At the Throckmorton house, she interviewed Alice Samuel, and what came after the interview served to confirm the suspicions the Throckmortons had. Lady Cromwell was tormented by Alice Samuel in her dreams, and after some time she became ill and died. Her death was considered murder, and it was added to the list of crimes of which the Samuel family were eventually accused. Imprisoned and tried before the Bishop of Lincoln, Alice, John, and Agnes Samuel were all found guilty of witchcraft and hanged in April 15, 93. In Wicca there are many rituals that are used when celebrating the Sabbats, worshipping the deities and working magic. Often these take place on a full moon, or in some cases a new moon, which is known as an Esbat. A Witch's Bible, The Complete Witch's Handbook, by Stuart and Janet Farrar. The classical ritual scheme in British traditional Wicca traditions is purification of the sacred space and the participants, casting the circle calling of the elemental quarters, cone of power drawing down the gods, spell casting great rite wine, cakes, chanting, dancing, games. Farewell to the quarters and participants. Joanne Pearson claims for some Wiccans, The ritual space is a space of resistance, in which the sexual morals of Christianity and patriarchy can be subverted. And for this reason they have adopted techniques from the BDSM subculture into their rituals. Publicly, many Wiccan groups have tended to excise the role of sex magic from their image. This has served both to escape the tabloid sensationalism that has targeted the religion since the 1950s and the concerns surrounding the satanic ritual abuse hysteria in the 1980s and 1990s. Alex Sanders was born in 1926. His real name was Oral Alexander Carter, and went under the craft name Verbius, was an English occultist and high priest in the pagan religion of Wicca. Responsible for founding the tradition of Alexandrian Wicca during the 1960s. Raised in a working-class family, he was introduced to esoteric ideas by his mother and grandmother from a young age. And as a young man began working as a medium in the local spiritualist churches before going on to study and practice ceremonial magic. In 1963, he was initiated into Gardnerian Wicca before founding his own coven, through which he merged many aspects of ceremonial magic into Wicca. He claimed to have been initiated by his grandmother as a child. Sanders, known as Oral Alexander Carter at the time, had tuberculosis as a child and regularly visited his grandmother, Mary Bibby, who is said to be a cunning woman that lived in Wales. According to Sanders, this was the beginning of his magical education. One evening in 1933, when I was 7, I was sent round to my grandmother's house for tea. For some reason I didn't knock at the door as I went in, and was confronted by my grandmother, naked, with her gray hair hanging down to her waist, standing in a circle drawn on the kitchen floor. Regaining her composure, she told Sanders to step into the circle, take off his clothes, and put his head between his thighs. As he did so, she took a sickle knife and nicked his scrotum, saying, "You are one of us now." It was then that Sanders realized she was a witch. His grandmother was a hereditary witch, a descendant of the Welsh chieftain Owen Glyndwr, the last man, according to Sanders, to have called himself King of the Witches. After the Second World War and his separation from Doreen and the children, Sanders felt isolated by his occult knowledge, and decided to live a life of the left-hand path after having drifted from one low-level job to another and had sexual affairs with both men and women. I made a dreadful mistake in using black magic in an attempt to bring myself money and sexual success. It worked all right. I was walking through Manchester and I was accosted by a middle-aged couple who told me that I was the exact double of their only son, who had died some years previously. They took me into their home, fed and clothed me, and treated me as one of the family. They were extremely wealthy, and in 1952, when I asked them for a house of my own, with an allowance to run it on, They were quite happy to grant my wishes. I held parties, I bought expensive clothes, I was sexually promiscuous, but it was only after a time that I realized I had a fearful debt to pay. One of Sanders' mistresses who he was particularly fond of committed suicide. His sister Joan was injured in an accidental shooting and shortly after diagnosed with terminal cancer. Sanders, blaming himself, resolved to stop using his magic for selfish reasons and instead teach it to others. During this period he also studied the works of Abraham Ellen. Apparently angels told him to seek employment in 1963 as a porter, book duster, and odd job man in the John Rylands Library, Manchester, where he could access an original copy of the Key of Solomon. Within weeks an allegation that he had defecated in the library basement led to the discovery that he had damaged a late 19th century edition of the S. L. Mathers translation of the Key of Solomon by ripping out the plates and taking them home. According to his own admission, he dismantled this book and borrowed it a few pages at a time for copying. Discovery of this nearly led to Sanders' prosecution, but the librarians allowed him an amnesty on condition that the materials were safely returned. After which he was dismissed without charges being brought against him. As well as this influence from Goetia which he incorporated into his version of Wicca, Sanders was greatly influenced by the teachings of Eliphas Levi. Two of the strangest and most enigmatic works of art in Britain can be found in a tower beside the River Thames according to The Guardian. The Salt Tower is part of the Tower of London. Like other places in this vast fortress, it has been used at various times in its history as a prison. And the images carved into its walls were created, like many other graffiti in the tower, by a prisoner making his mark before he suffered who knew what awful death. Hugh Draper was a 16th century Bristol innkeeper who got sent to the tower for attempted sorcery. He claimed that although he had been interested in magic, he had burnt all his magical books, but his engravings, cut into the very stone of the Salt Tower, reveal he knew plenty about the occult. For a man trying to prove he was no witch, these arcana are the equivalent of someone accused of dissidence in 1950s Russia writing passages from Orwell's 1984 on the cell wall. On one wall, he carved a spectacularly large and detailed astrological sphere with zodiacal signs. It is intricately detailed, replete with numbers and crisscrossing lines that communicate Draper's deep belief in the power of the stars. Nearby is a still more accomplished image, a picture of a bronze astrological globe. This image has a sense of depth as well as the same geometrical accuracy as the big sphere. On the zodiac design, he wrote, Hugh Draper of Bristow made this sphere the 30th day of Mayo anno 1561. After the May 30th 1561 it is said he was never seen again. No record of his death, execution, or release has ever been found. The North Berwick in Scotland witch trials of the late 16th century are notable not only for the sheer number of people involved, over the 2 years from 1590 to 1592. Around 100 supposed witches and warlocks were implicated in the case, but because the trials were, for much of their duration, personally overseen by the king himself, James VI of Scotland and I of England and Ireland. James XXIII at the time was convinced that a local coven of witches had together raised a storm to wreck the ship on which he and his new bride, Anne of Denmark, who was 14, were returning home from their wedding in Norway. Once suspicions were raised, one of the first to be accused was guileless Duncan, the young servant of a local chamberlain, who confessed under torture to practicing witchcraft when her apparent gift for healing the sick aroused suspicion. Duncan implicated 3 further people in her confession, who each implicated several others, who were all then in turn brought in for questioning. One of the accused, Agnes Simpson, a local midwife and healer, was even taken before the king himself for questioning. After confessing to more than 50 crimes brought against her, including relieving the pains of a woman in labor by suffering them herself, and even baptizing a cat, Simpson was executed in January 1591. Another, Euphemie MacCalzian, was burned alive without being granted the mercy of being hanged first, an astonishingly severe sentence even for the 16th century. In all, a total of 6 supposed witches were executed. There was a church on the green where the witches were said to hold their covens, dance, and summon the devil. This was St. Andrew's Kirk, situated on the seafront. Eventually, the supposed network of witchcraft James and his court uncovered led him to believe that his cousin Francis Stuart, the 5th Earl of Bothwell, had been behind the entire plot, and had worked with the coven to plot to kill the king and secure the throne for himself. In 1593, however, Bothwell staged a short-lived coup in James's court and took the opportunity to have himself acquitted of the charges against him. After James retook control, Bothwell fled into exile and died in Naples in 1612. In numerical terms, Scotland's witch hunts were severe. Between 1590 and 1662, 5 intense panics erupted across Scotland. As a result of these panics, out of a population of roughly 1 million people, about 2,500 accused witches, most of them women, were executed. 5 times the average European execution rate per capita. King James VI and the First was King of Scotland as James VI, and King of England and King of Ireland as James I. He was the first monarch to be called the King of Great Britain. He ruled in Scotland as James VI from July 24, 1567 until his death on the March 27, 1625, and he ruled in England and Ireland from March 24, 1603 until his death. He is probably most famous for the authorized King James Version of the Bible. King James I of England told the Church of England to begin working on an English version of the Bible in 1604, and the first book was published in 1611. It is still one of the most widely used versions of the Bible to this day. He was a target of the Gunpowder Plot. A group of Catholics planned to blow up the Houses of Parliament on November 5, 1605 during a ceremony while James was in the building. The plot was stopped when a member of the group, Guy Fawkes, was found in a basement with barrels of gunpowder. The event is remembered every year on November 5th, also known as Bonfire Night, where many people decide to celebrate and light bonfires and fireworks. James wrote Demonology in 1597. It is described on Wikipedia as a medieval philosophy that discusses the relationship between ancient necromancy and the ancient black magic that was popular during the Middle Ages. The book is 3 books called First Book, Second Book, and Third Book is again written in late 16th century English. On First Book page 10 he writes, "That is over large and field ye give me, yet I shall do good will, the most summary that I can, to run through the principal points thereof. As there are 2 sorts of folks, that may be enticed to this art, to wit, learned or unlearned. So is there 2 means, which are the first steerers up and feeders of their curiosity, thereby to make them to give themselves over to the same. Which 2 means, I call the devil's school, and his rudiments. The learned how their curiosity wakened, and fed by that which I call his school, this is the astrology judicia. For divers men having attained to a great perfection in learning, and yet remaining overbear, alas, of the spirit of regeneration and fruits thereof. Finding all natural things common, as well to the stupid pedants as unto them, they assay to vindicate unto them a greater name, by not only knowing the course of things heavenly, but likewise to cling to the knowledge of things to come thereby. Which, at the first face appearing lawful veen to them, in respect the ground thereof seemeth to proceed of natural causes only. They are so allured thereby, that finding their practice to prove true in sundry things, they study to know the cause thereof. And so mounting from degree to degree, vpon the slippery and uncertain scale of curiosity, they are at last enticed, that where lawful arts or sciences fails, to satisfy their restless minds, even to seek to that black and unlawful science of magic. Where, finding at the first, that such diverse forms of circles and conjurations rightly joined thereunto, will raise such divers forms of spirits, to resolve them of their doubts. And attributing the doing thereof, to the power inseparable tied, or inherent in the circles, and Monnier words of God, confused lie wrapped in. They blind glory of themselves, as if they had by their quickness of eye made a conquest of Pluto's dominion, and were become emperors over the Stygian habitacles. Where, in the meantime, miserable wretches, they are become in very deed, bond slaves to their mortal enemy. And their knowledge, for all that they presume thereof, is nothing increased, except in knowing evil, and the horrors of hell for punishment thereof. As Adam's was by the eating of the forbidden tree. Second book, page 28 reads, Now since ye have satisfied me now so fully, concerning magic or necromancy, I will pray you to do the like in sorcery or witchcraft. That field is likewise very large. And although in the mouths and pennies of many, yet few knows the truth thereof, so well as they believe themselves, as I shall so shortly as I can, make you, God willing, as easily to perceive. But I pray you, before ye go further, let me interrupt you here with a short digression, which is, that many can scarcely believe that there is such a thing as witchcraft, whose reasons I will shortly allege unto you, that ye may satisfy me as well in that, as ye have done in the rest. For first, whereas the Scripture seems to prove witchcraft to be, by diverse examples, and specially by sundry of the same, which ye have alleged, it is thought by some, that these places speaks of magicians and necromancers only, and not of witches. As in special, these wise men of Pharaoh's, that counterfeited Moses' miracles, were magicians, say they, and not witches, as likewise that Pythoness that Saul consulted with. And so was Simon Magus in the New Testament, as that very style imports. Secondly, where ye would oppose the daily practice, and confession of so many, that is thought likewise to be but very melancholic imaginations of simple raving creatures. Thirdly, if witches had such power of witching of folks to death, as they say they have, there had been none left alive long since in the world, but they, at the least, no good or godly person of whatsoever estate, could have escaped their devilry. Your three reasons, as I take, are grounded, the first of them negative upon the Scripture, the second affirmative upon physique, and the third upon the certain proof of experience. As to your first, it is most true indeed, that all these wise men of Pharaoh were magicians of art. As likewise it appears that the Pythoness, with whom Saul consulted, was of that same profession, and so was Simon Magus. But ye omitted to speak of the law of God, wherein are all magicians, divines, enchanters, sorcerers, witches, and whatsoever of that kind that consults with the devil, plainly prohibited, and alike threatened against. And besides that, she who had the spirit of Python, in the Acts, whose spirit was put to silence by the apostle, could be no other thing but a very sorcerer or witch, if ye admit the vulgar distinction, to be in a manner true. Whereof I spake in the beginning of our conference. For that spirit whereby she conquests such gain to her master, was not at her raising or commanding, as she pleased to appoint, but spoke by her tongue, as well publicly, as privately. Whereby she seemed to draw nearer to the sort of demoniacs or possessed, if that conjunction betwixt them, had not been of her own consent, as it appeared by her, not being tormented therewith. And by her conquesting of such gain to her masters, as I have already said. As to your second reason grounded upon physique, in attributing their confessions or apprehensions to a natural melancholic humor, any that pleases physically to consider upon the natural humor of melancholy, according to all the physicians, that ever writ thereupon, they shall find that will be overshort a cloak to cover their knavery with. For as the humor of melancholy in the self is black, heavy, and terrene, so are the symptoms thereof, in any persons that are subject thereunto, leanness, paleness, desire of solitude. And if they come to the highest degree thereof, mere folly and many. Whereas by the contrary, a great number of them that ever have been convict or confessors of witchcraft, as may be presently seen by many that have at this time confessed. They are by the contrary, I say, some of them rich and worldly wise, some of them fat or corpulent in their bodies, and most part of them altogether given over to the pleasures of the flesh. Continual haunting of company, and all kind of merriness, both lawful and unlawful, which are things directly contrary to the symptoms of melancholy, whereof I spake. And further experience daily proves how loath they are to confess without torture, which witness their guiltiness, whereby the contrary, the melancholic case never spares to betray themselves. By their continual discourses, feeding thereby their humor in that which they think no crime. As to your third reason, it scarcely merits an answer. For if the devil their master were not bridled, as the scriptures teach us, suppose there were no men nor women to be his instruments. He could find ways enough without any help of others to rack all mankind. Whereunto he employs his whole study, and goeth about like a roaring lion to that effect, but the limits of his power were set down before the foundations of the world were laid, which he hath not power in the least yot to transgress. But beside all this, there is over great a certainty to prove that they are, by the daily experience of the harms that they do, both to men, and whatsoever thing man possesses, whom God will permit them to be the instruments, so to trouble or visit, as in my discourse of that art, ye shall hear clearly proved. Page 57 of the third book reads, that kind of the devils conversing in the earth, may be divided in 4 different kinds, whereby he affray and troubleth the bodies of men, for of the abusing of the soul, I have spoken already. The first is, where spirits trouble some houses or solitary places, the second, where spirits follows upon certain persons, and at diverse hours troubles them. The third, when they enter within them and possess them, The fourth is these kind of spirits that are called vulgarly the fairy. Of the three former kinds, ye heard already, how they may artificially be made by witchcraft to trouble folk. Now it rests to speak of their natural coming as it were, and not raised by witchcraft. But generally I must forewarn you of one thing before I enter in this purpose. That is, that although in my discoursing of them, I do them in diverse kinds, ye must notwithstanding thereof note my phrase of speaking in that. For doubtlessly they are in effect, but all one kind of spirits, who for abusing the more of mankind, takes on these sundry shapes, and uses diverse forms of outward actions, as if some were of nature better than other. Now I return to my purpose, as to the first kind of these spirits, that were called by the ancients by diverse names, according as their actions were. For if they were spirits that haunted some houses, by appearing in diverse and horrible forms, and making great din, they were called lemures or spectra. If they appeared in likeness of any defunct to some friends of his, they were called umbra mortuorum, and so innumerable styles they got, according to their actions, as I have said already. As we see by experience, how many styles they have given them in our language in the like manner, of the appearing of these spirits, we are certified by the Scriptures. Page 67 reads the next question that I would spear, is likewise concerning this first of these two kinds of spirits that ye have conjoined, and it is this. Ye know how it is commonly written and reported, that amongst the rest of the sorts of spirits that follows certain persons, there is one more monstrous nor all the rest. In respect as it is alleged, they converse naturally with them whom they trouble and haunts with, and therefore I would know in two things your opinion herein, first if such a thing can be, and next if it be, whether there be a difference of sexes amongst these spirits or not. That abominable kind of the devil's abusing of men or women, was called of old incubi and succubi, according to the difference of the sexes that they conversed with. By two means this great kind of abuse might possibly be performed. The one, when the devil only as a spirit, and stealing out the sperm of a dead body, abuses them that way, they not gridly seeing any shape or feeling anything. But that which he so connuaes in that part, as we read of a monastery of nuns which were burnt for their being that way abused. The other mean is when he borrows a dead body and so visible, and as it seems unto them naturally as a man converses with them. But it is to be noted, that in whatsoever way he vies it, that sperm seems intolerably cold to the person abused. For if he steal out the nature of a quick person, it cannot be so quickly carried, but it will both tine the strength and heat by the way, which it could never have had for lack of agitation, which in the time of procreation is the procurer and awakener up of these two natural qualities. And if he occupying the dead body as his lodging expel the same out thereof in the due time, it must likewise be cold by the participation with the qualities of the dead body whereout of it comes. And whereas ye inquire if these spirits be divided in sexes or not, I think the rules of philosophy may easily resolve a man of the contrary. For it is a sure principle of that arte, that nothing can be divided in sexes, except such living bodies as must have a natural seed to genera by. But we know spirits hath no seed proper to themselves, nor yet can they gender one with another. Page 71. King James I writes, as to your first question, there are diverse symptoms, whereby that holy trouble may be discerned from a natural sickness, and specially three, omitting the diverse vain signs that the papists attributes unto it, such as the raging at holy water, their fleeing aback from the croce, their not abiding the hearing of God named, and innumerable such like vain things that were alike facetious and fecals to recite. But to come to these three symptoms then, whereof I spake, I account the one of them to be the incredible strength of the possessed creature, which will far exceed the strength of 6 of the whitest and wattest of any other men that are not so troubled. The next is the boldning up so far of the patient's breast and belly, with such an unnatural stirring and vehement agitation within them, and such an irony hardness of his sinews so stiffly bended out, that it were not possible to prick out as it were the skin of any other person so far. So mightily works the devil in all the members and senses of his body, he being locally within the same, suppose of his soul and affections thereof, he have no more power than of any other man's. The last is, the speaking of sundry languages, which the patient is known by them that were him never to have learned, and that with an uncouth and hollow voice, and all the time of his speaking, a greater motion being in his breast than in his mouth. But fra this last symptom is accepted such, as are altogether in the time of their possessing bereft of all their senses, being possessed with a dumb and blind a spirit, whereof Christ relieved one in Matthew. And as to your next demand, it is first to be doubted if the papists or any not professing the only true religion, can relieve any of that trouble. And next, in case they can, upon what respects it is possible unto them. As to the former, upon 2 reasons, it is grounded, first that it is known so many of them to be counterfeit, which while the clergy inunts for confirming of their rotten religion. The next is, that by experience we find that few, who are possessed indeed, are fully cured by them. But rather the devil is content to release the bodily hurting of them, for a short space, thereby to obtain the perpetual hurt of the souls of so many that by these false miracles may be induced or confirmed in the profession of that erroneous religion. Even as I told you before that he doth in the false cures, or casting off of diseases by witches. As to the other part of the argument, in case they can, which rather, with reverence of the learned thinking otherwise, I am induced to believe, by reason of the faithful report that men sound of religion, have made according to their sight thereof, I think if so be, I say these may be the respects, whereupon the papists may have that power. Christ gave a commission and power to his apostles to cast out devils, which they according thereunto put in execution. The rules he bade them observe in that action, was fasting and prayer, and the action itself to be done in his name. This power of theirs proceeded not then of any virtue in them, but only in him who directed them, as was clearly proved by Judas his having as great power in that commission, as any of the rest. It is easy then to be understand that the casting out of devils, is by the virtue of fasting and prayer, and in calling of the name of God. From these descriptions and encounters taken from people that lived through the witchcraft trials, it seems obvious that paranoia and superstition were high. It is most likely that thousands of innocent people were burned and tortured to death as witch hunters and lynch mobs employed their own forms of justice. But that is not to say that the fear of witches and warlocks was totally irrational or without merit. Considering the fear of witches still exists in many parts of the world, maybe there were more to the witch trials than what first meets the eye. The fact remains that even now in the year 2020 there is evidence of organized, secret rituals are still taking place in rural areas of the United Kingdom. There are still allegations and rumors of animal and human sacrifice taking place on a scale that most would not believe. Is that what caused the paranoia to begin with? Were people living in 16th and 17th century Britain witnessing and describing, to the best of their ability, the same phenomenon that we witnessing in the 21st century? Witchcraft, paganism, Wicca, voodoo, Satanism, black magic, mysticism, Western esotericism and the New Age movement are all arguably and probably all variations of the oldest and potentially the darkest form of religion, the occult.